The capsizing of the Herald of Free Enterprise in March of 1987 stood as a watershed moment in maritime history, fundamentally reshaping ferry safety protocols and accountability. What began as a routine crossing from Zeebrugge to Dover transformed into a catastrophe when the vessel departed port with its bow doors open, leading to a devastating sequence of events that claimed 193 lives in just 90 seconds. The disaster not only exposed critical issues in roll-on, roll-off ferry designs, but also highlighted systemic failures in safety management oversight. In its aftermath, the tragedy catalyzed sweeping reforms across the maritime industry, leaving an enduring legacy that continues to influence marine safety practices to this day. For Maritime Mishaps, here's a deeper dive into the catastrophe that was the Zeebrugge Disaster of '87. Townsend Thoresen launched an ambitious transportation project in the late 1970s, commissioning 3 identical Spirit-class vessels to strengthen its Dover-Calais route. These ships, Spirit, Herald, and Pride, carried the Free Enterprise designation as a tribute to Townsend Car Ferry's groundbreaking 1962 introduction of roll-on, roll-off, also called ro-ro, services. The Herald of Free Enterprise began its operational life on May 29, 1980, representing cutting-edge maritime design focused on efficiency. The Spirit-class vessels were specifically engineered to excel in the competitive Dover-Calais corridor, emphasizing swift cargo handling and rapid acceleration. Their 8-tier structure, designated by letters A through H, served distinct purposes throughout the vessel. The bottommost A deck contained crew quarters and communications facilities, while the intermediary half deck, situated between levels A and B, housed the command center. Both B and C decks accommodated passenger facilities, crew living spaces, and food preparation areas. German shipbuilders constructed these vessels at their Bremerhaven facility. Each ship's power plant comprised 3 Sulzer 12-cylinder medium-speed diesel engines. These engines drove variable pitch propellers, delivering the quick acceleration essential for efficient channel crossings. While maritime experts initially praised the Spirit-class design for its revolutionary approach to speed and efficiency, these same characteristics later faced intense scrutiny following the Herald of Free Enterprise's tragic capsizing. The very features that enhanced operational performance ultimately revealed critical safety vulnerabilities. On the night of the Herald of Free Enterprise tragedy, the vessel had been trimmed by the bow to facilitate loading operations on E deck. Loading for E deck was completed before G deck, and by 5:40 p.m. GMT, the process of stripping the number 14 deep tank had begun. Approximately 50 tons of water had been pumped out of number 14 by the time the ship departed, with an additional 50 tons removed by the time the vessel capsized. This amounted to a total of 100 tons stripped during the voyage. The Herald was operating under a C1 condition for the trip, which meant it was designed to sustain damage to a single compartment without losing stability or allowing water to submerge the margin line, an extremely thin, imaginary boundary 76 millimeters below the bulkhead deck. Upon departure, the ship's displacement included its light ship weight combined with all consumables, such as fuel, fresh water, and provisions, the weight of passengers and crew with their belongings, and the cargo consisting of vehicles and luggage. Further investigations revealed discrepancies in the weights of vehicles loaded onto similar ships in the fleet. In early June, tests conducted on the sister ship, Pride of Free Enterprise, revealed that the ship could not accommodate the weight of vehicles based on declared waybill weights in the builder's lightship specifications. The Herald was similarly affected, with modifications increasing its lightship weight by approximately 102 tons, and an estimated total increase of 250 to 270 tons over its original builder specifications. These calculations indicated that the Herald was likely overloaded by approximately 0.13 meters at departure. Although this overload was not a direct cause of the disaster, it underscored significant operational shortcomings that would ultimately spell doom for nearly 200 innocent people. At 6:05 p.m. GMT on March 6, 1987, the Herald of Free Enterprise commenced its journey from Zeebrugge's inner harbor. The vessel transported 80 crew members and 459 passengers, along with a cargo of 81 automobiles, 3 buses, and 47 commercial trucks. After clearing the outer mole at 6:24 p.m. GMT, Catastrophe struck within just 4 minutes. The ferry's speed climbed to 18.9 knots, or about 22 miles per hour, shortly after departure. During this acceleration, massive quantities of seawater surged onto the vehicle deck, triggering a dangerous maritime phenomenon, the free surface effect, which devastated the vessel's stability. The ship lurched violently to port at a 30-degree angle. Though it momentarily stabilized, this reprieve proved fleeting, as the vessel subsequently rolled over completely. The entire catastrophe unfolded in just 1.5 minutes. The rush of water immediately compromised the ship's electrical systems, destroying both primary and backup power supplies. In total darkness, the stricken vessel crashed onto its side, partially submerged in shallow waters roughly 1 kilometer from land. A fortunate final starboard rotation and grounding on a sandbank prevented the ferry from sinking into deeper waters, an outcome that would have likely claimed far more lives. Alert crew members on a nearby dredging vessel noticed the abrupt disappearance of the Herald of Free Enterprise's lights and spotted its bow doors completely open. Their swift report to port authorities at 6:37 p.m. GMT launched an immediate rescue mission. The response team included helicopter units and members of the Belgian Navy, who fortuitously were conducting exercises in the vicinity. The capsizing of the Herald of Free Enterprise stood as one of the darkest chapters in maritime history, inflicting deep emotional wounds that would forever mark those who lived through it. A 16-year-old girl endured unimaginable loss when the disaster claimed the lives of her mother, stepfather, and uncle, though she and her 3 stepbrothers survived the ordeal. The 16-year-old painted a chilling picture of that fateful night. Standing on deck, she observed with growing alarm as the water level appeared to drop away beneath her. Before she could process what was happening, the vessel's violent tilt hurled her backwards, rendering her unconscious. She awakened to find herself sprawled across displaced seats as the ship lay on its side. Despite her desperate attempts to climb back inside to find her mother, circumstances forced her into the icy waters below. The sea threatened to claim her as she battled against her waterlogged denim coat and boots. After struggling free of these constraints, she attempted to swim shoreward, but found herself overwhelmed by the harsh conditions. While clinging to the overturned vessel, she encountered another survivor desperately holding a child above water. Though helicopters circled overhead, they missed these victims below. The teenager made the wrenching decision to swim toward a nearby fishing vessel, vowing to direct rescuers back to the pair. Her efforts proved futile. She later learned that neither survived. Though medical personnel successfully treated her physical injuries, the psychological impact of that night was permanent. An anonymous crew member also experienced the catastrophe from within the driver's lounge kiosk. The ship's sudden list, accompanied by flooding windows and sliding furniture, plunged the vessel into darkness filled with terrified screams. After climbing to safety on the ship's exposed side, he assisted a young girl's rescue before reaching shore himself. The trauma kept him landlocked for nearly 10 years until he finally resumed his maritime career at the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. The following day brought devastating news to the aforementioned teenage girl and her stepbrothers about their parents' deaths. At an improvised mortuary in a gymnasium, she faced the heartbreaking sight of children she had just seen alive hours before. The pain of viewing her mother's body was particularly painful, as she had lost not just a parent, but her closest confidant. The catastrophe shattered countless other families as well, including 2 newlyweds. The bride's mother learned of their presence on board the Herald while in Australia. Her desperate search in Belgium ended with the devastating confirmation of her daughter's death, while her son-in-law's remains stayed trapped until the ship's recovery weeks later. They were laid to rest together in Windsor Cemetery. A merchant navy chaplain shepherded bereaved families through their darkest hours. He described this period as his ministry's greatest challenge, conducting services for victims, including a 17-year-old, on his first voyage. Many families endured agonizing weeks, awaiting the recovery of loved ones. Yet even amid this tragedy, tales of heroism emerged. Fellow passengers fought to keep each other alive in the frigid waters, their acts of courage and compassion shining as beacons of hope. The official rescue operation also highlighted these extraordinary acts of heroism, notably from Wolfgang Schroeder, captain of the MV Gabriel Ver, which was operating nearby. His courageous efforts to save passengers earned high praise, including recognition from British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and a distinguished medal bestowed by Belgium's King Boudin. The rapid response of Captain Schroeder and other rescue teams proved crucial in preventing additional casualties during this devastating maritime tragedy of the late 20th century. On the night of the disaster, the Herald of Free Enterprise departed from its berth and navigated through the inner harbor en route to the open sea. The vessel was maneuvered using combinators, a system on the bridge that controlled the pitch of the propellers in conjunction with engine speed. While the center engine was equipped with a true combinator system, the wing engines operated at constant revolutions, with pitch adjustments managing the load automatically. Testimonies from the master and deck officers revealed a standard practice of limiting speed while entering or leaving Zeebrugge to prevent water from overtopping the bowspade. The second officer, tasked with monitoring the bowspade, would notify the master to reduce speed if water began to breach the spade. Despite this protocol, evidence suggested that on the night of March 6th, the ship exceeded these self-imposed speed limits. The Herald accelerated rapidly to an estimated 18 knots as it passed the outer mole, creating a significant bow wave. The dynamic sinkage allowed water to flood the vehicle deck through the open bow doors, contributing to the vessel's instability. Operating at 40% capacity between Dover and Zeebrugge, the roll-on, roll-off ferry's fate was sealed when it departed the port with these open bow doors. As vehicles shifted position, the vessel became unstable and capsized into a sandbank within 90 seconds, too quickly for any emergency measures to be implemented. The court concluded that the master, Captain Lurie, did not adhere to the stated practice of limiting speed to avoid water ingress. The bow wave, estimated to be 2 meters above the spade, allowed substantial volumes of water to flood G-deck. The water, trapped due to the free surface instability, caused the ship to lurch to port, with a large angle of lull stabilizing momentarily before the continued inflow of water led to a gradual capsize. Ultimately, the Herald overturned completely, possibly resting briefly on its beam ends before sinking into the seabed. The immediate cause of the disaster was eventually confirmed to be the result of the vessel departing with its bow doors open. Mark Victor Stanley, the assistant bosun, admitted responsibility for failing to close the doors. He had opened them upon arrival at Zeebrugge, and after supervising maintenance activities, retired to his cabin. Stanley then fell asleep and did not respond to the harbor station's announcement. He remained in his cabin until he was thrown from his bunk as the ship capsized. While Stanley acknowledged his failure and expressed remorse, he acted heroically after the disaster by assisting trapped passengers, despite sustaining serious injuries. The lead bosun, Terrence Ayling, reported leaving G-Deck after placing a chain across the bow door opening. He stated he did not close the doors as it was not his assigned duty. This narrow interpretation of his responsibilities, though consistent with past practices, highlighted the systemic failure. Second Officer Paul Mortar testified that he was initially in charge of loading G-Deck, but was relieved by Chief Officer Leslie Sable shortly before departure. Miscommunication and unclear responsibilities between the two officers left the critical task of securing the bow doors unaddressed. Sable, believing the assistant bosun would arrive to close the doors, left G-Deck to report to the bridge, his harbor station. However, the bosun never arrived, and the doors remained open as the ship sailed. The court criticized Sable's actions, deeming his failure to ensure the bow doors were closed as gross negligence. Although his recollection of events was inconsistent, possibly due to physical and emotional trauma suffered during the disaster, the evidence pointed to his dereliction of duty as the most immediate cause of the tragedy. Consequently, the court ordered the suspension of a certificate of competency. The investigation also identified systemic failings, including lax enforcement of safety protocols. A 1984 instruction required the loading officer to confirm that bow doors were secured before departure, but this directive was routinely ignored or misinterpreted. Past incidents, such as the similar oversight on the Pride of Free Enterprise in 1983, demonstrated that this safety risk was well known but inadequately addressed. Following the Herald of Free Enterprise disaster, an October 1987 coroner's inquest delivered 187 unlawful killing verdicts. The subsequent legal battle saw 7 employees of P&O European Ferries Limited face gross negligence manslaughter charges, while the corporation itself confronted corporate manslaughter allegations. The presiding judge ultimately directed the jury to acquit both the company and its executives, citing the difficulty of linking negligence to a specific quote-unquote controlling mind. Though the prosecution failed, this case established corporate manslaughter as a recognized offense in England and Wales, and influenced the creation of the Public Interest Disclosure Act of 1998, designed to shield whistleblowers. Dutch salvage firms initiated recovery operations shortly after the disaster. Through parbuckling techniques, they refloated the vessel by late April 1987, enabling recovery of remaining victims. After transport to Zeebrugge and then a shipyard in the Netherlands, restoration proved economically unfeasible. The vessel, acquired by a Greek ship company, began its final journey to Taiwan for dismantling in October 1987. Stripped and renamed Flushing Range, the ship endured multiple challenges en route, including the Great Storm of 1987 and structural deterioration off South Africa's coast, necessitating repairs in Port Elizabeth. It reached its final destination in Taiwan on March 22, 1988, where it was ultimately scrapped. The Catastrophe ranked as Britain's worst peacetime maritime loss since the HMY Isle Air's 1919 sinking, which took over 200 lives. The extensive media coverage irreparably damaged the vessel's brand, prompting new owner P&O to rebrand as P&O European Ferries. The incident sparked sweeping safety reforms for roll-on roll-off vessels, including bridge-mounted door monitors, watertight bow ramps, and flooding drainage systems. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea modified its 1990 regulations, mandating increased freeboard heights for new ro-ro vessels. Some designs eliminated bow doors entirely, while International Maritime Organization guidelines prohibited open, undivided passenger decks. Maritime education programs frequently reference the disaster when teaching ship stability principles. The tragedy garnered extensive media attention through various documentaries and literary works, preserving the disaster's memory. These works, alongside implemented safety reforms, pose critical lessons to be taken from this catastrophic event. May those who perished and the families of the victims of the Herald of Free Enterprise tragedy never be forgotten.